Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where we are tracking two major political stories. The Democratic National Committee finally releasing its autopsy of the 2024 campaign today after intense pressure to make the document public, and despite the DNC chair saying just last month it would not be released. We have more on that in just a few minutes, but we do want to begin with President Trump, whose top priorities could imperil his Capitol Hill agenda, as some Republicans warn he could jeopardize Republicans' chances in the midterms. Nowhere is that more evident than the fight over the Trump administration's controversial $1.8 billion fund to provide payments to Americans who claim to be victims of what the White House calls weaponization by the Biden administration. Today, Republicans in both the House and Senate canceled planned votes on a bill to fund ICE and Border Patrol because of objections to the White House push for the so-called anti-weaponization fund. That's according to two sources familiar with the discussion. It comes after Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche met today with Senate Republicans as the party debates putting guardrails on the fund in that bill. Speaking to reporters this afternoon, Majority Leader John Thune said he wishes the White House had consulted him first.
Did the White House consult you in advance about this victimization fund? And I mean, would you have advised it against doing that at this point?
Well, it would have been nice if they had consulted. I think they probably would have gotten plenty of advice from lots of folks about it. But it's water under the bridge now, and you play the hand you're dealt.
The small but notable number of Republicans pushing back against this fund are frequent Trump critics and lawmakers who are either not running for re-election or who were primaried by President Trump. Back candidates. Take a listen.
What do you want to hear from Todd Blanche?
About the payout pot for punks? Not a lot. Look, under what circumstances would it ever make sense to provide restitution for people who were either pled guilty or were found guilty in a court of law?
Do you think you have colleagues that share the same concerns that you're expressing?
Yeah, they do. They need to speak up. I mean, this is beyond the pale.
We got to unpack exactly what it is, what the source of the funding is, in order to stop it and or reverse it. Right?
So you want to stop it?
Oh, 100%.
And Senator Cassidy criticized the fund on social media, writing, quote, "People are concerned about paying their mortgage or rent, affording groceries, and paying for gas, not about putting together a $1.8 billion fund for the president and his allies to pay whomever they wish with no legal precedent or accountability." It comes as polling shows the president's approval rating has hit new lows, driven in part by voters' disapproval over President Trump's handling of key issues. Chief among them, the cost of living and the Iran war, with a new poll showing more than 3/4 of voters blaming Trump administration policies for rising gas prices. Senator Tom Tillis warning if the president doesn't focus on issues that matter to voters, Republicans could lose in November.
The president's not up for re-election this year or ever. We are. And we're being forced to take policy votes that are not helpful to the electorate. The president's priorities right now have to be second to what we need to do to keep control of Congress, in my opinion.
Another of the president's priorities creating tension within his own party, the $1 billion in funding for security-related construction for the White House ballroom that Republican senators are seeking to strip from the bill.
There's no architectural plans. There is no environmentals. There's no engineering. There's no sense of, when we ask, how did it happen to cost exactly $1 billion?
Today, the president is missing any dissent within the Republican ranks as he again insisted the ballroom will be privately funded.
Are you losing control of the Senate Republican?
I don't know. I really don't know. I can tell you, I only do what's right. I don't need money for the ballroom. You're not making a gift of the ballroom. The money that they're spending is for security, having to do maybe around the ballroom and other parts of the house, but this is not for the ballroom. If they want to spend money on securing the White House, I think it would be very, very much a good expenditure, but the ballroom is being built.
Well, what if Congress doesn't sign off on the security money, sir?
Then the White House won't be a very secure place.
Joining me now is Chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles, and NBC's Monica Alba is at the White House. Thanks to both of you for joining me. Ryan, I want to start with you on Capitol Hill because big developments there. The Senate and House deciding to leave town without voting on the big reconciliation bill over objections over what I was just talking about, this so-called weaponization fund. What are the implications? Where does it all go from here?
Well, I don't want to get too far ahead of the situation here, Kristen, but I do believe that today could be a turning point. This may be the day that Donald Trump finally broke the Congress, certainly the United States Senate. What I thought was so compelling about your introduction here and how you laid it all out so artfully was that all of the opposition that you showed in opposition to the White House and the administration's moves today were all Republicans. This is the first time that we've seen a defined and organized effort by Republicans in Congress to stand up and reject something that the White House has put forward. And what the Senate did today, which I think is particularly interesting, is that they took a piece of legislation that is widely supported by Republicans, and that's the extension of Customs and Border Patrol funding and ICE funding through the balance of the Trump administration, something that was removed from the DHS appropriations package during that lengthy DHS shutdown. And they put it on hold specifically because they have concerns about this GOP weaponization fund that the Department of Justice has introduced as a result of this settlement. It wasn't even a part of the legislation. It has nothing to do with the legislation. But this is something that Donald Trump really wants in terms of the reconciliation funding, that ICE and Border Patrol funding. And Republicans in the Senate decided they needed to send a message to the White House that you're not going to get what you want here unless you deal with this thing over here that we are very upset with. We have not seen this sort of forceful pushback by Republicans in Congress since this version of the Trump administration.
Ryan, it's absolutely striking to hear you talk about this moment in those terms, that this may be the moment that actually broke Republicans in Congress. So let me ask you, broadly speaking, what does all of this mean about the potential future path for this reconciliation bill? Do you anticipate that it gets done when Congress comes back?
Well, they're going to have more than a week to sit and take a step back and try and figure out the next path forward. There, I'm sure, is some hope within the Republican ranks that the White House takes a second look at this weaponization fund and either decides to scrap it altogether or dramatically change it or work with Congress to actually craft some sort of statute that would put guardrails around it and make it more appropriate than where they view it as it currently being. But I do believe, Kristen, that this could just be a harbinger for the future. It's not just this weaponization fund that has angered Republicans, particularly in the Senate. It also comes on the heels of Bill Cassidy losing his primary on Sunday after Donald Trump forcefully endorsed another candidate, basically sending an incumbent packing. It comes after he chose to endorse Ken Paxton over the incumbent Senator John Cornyn in Texas, making the possibility of the Senate that much more difficult for the Republicans to retain in the fall. It feels as though Senate Republicans feel that they've done a lot to stick their necks out for Donald Trump, and he has not returned that favor. So there's a long list of things that Congress would like to get done in the foreseeable future, that ICE and Border Patrol funding being the first thing, but there's talk of a third potential reconciliation package. There's a whole spending bill that's going to need to come up to fund all of the government in September. And let's not forget that the White House and the Pentagon are prepared to ask for potentially hundreds of $millions in funding for the war effort in Iran. It's going to be a much tougher ask given the current environment.
There's no doubt about that. Let me head to Monica at the White House. Monica, weigh in on what Ryan is saying here. Based on your conversations with sources inside the administration, is there any sense that President Trump might back away from or put guardrails around this anti-weaponization fund? What are you hearing?
It is certainly unlikely that this is something the president would want to do, Kristen, but whether he is going to have to be forced into at least considering that or making any changes to the way this fund may operate does seem like something that the White House is going to at least have to contend with and confront. And what's really interesting is that we just spotted a few moments ago Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche arrive here at the White House. Now, he is a frequent visitor here. He has meetings all the time with the president and with others, so it's not unusual for him to be here. But the fact that he was just on Capitol Hill earlier today in that meeting with those lawmakers that clearly came out of that discussion unpleased, unimpressed, and unsatisfied with some of those answers does maybe suggest that there is a larger conversation that is now taking place within the Trump administration. We've asked the White House if that is why he's here or if they are discussing any number of other issues. But that is something certainly to watch for. And we will know, Kristen, I think pretty soon whether the president feels that anything is going to shift here or whether there's going to be a change. But I think it's fascinating, the collision of storylines that have so much important overlapping elements to them here. The fact that you have this massive $1.8 billion fund that is made up of taxpayer money, the $1 billion that if Congress were to appropriate for the ballroom security enhancements, also taxpayer money. These are the two things that are sort of dominating the conversation on a day where the president was trying to bring some attention to what they view as their affordability pitch and trying to make that the sort of dominant message of the day. And again, you have these other competing stories that are very important for the president, things that he has touted, that he's trying to prioritize, but that ultimately just are at odds with the other kind of economic message that he's trying to put out there.
Monica, let me ask you, because all of this comes as, yet again, as you heard me lay out at the top of the show, the president's facing more poll numbers which show that voters are dissatisfied and disapproving of his handling of a range of different issues, from inflation, negative 55%, Monica, cost of living, economy, Iran, negative 34%. How is the White House internally responding to this feedback from the public?
Yeah, they're trying to schedule more events like the one that he had earlier today, where he was trying to say that this rollback of EPA regulations from the Biden administration could potentially help Americans cut their grocery prices in some way. Experts and critics say that that is unlikely to happen in the short term. So it's always sort of apparent in the background, but it is certainly something that obviously is being taken in with all of these other major issues. And the president has said as much publicly. The ballroom is such a priority for him. It takes up so much of his time and attention, and that has certainly been the case today. And they are certainly, he says, going to continue with the construction, even though it is potentially facing legal hurdles in addition to challenges on Capitol Hill, too.
All right. Ryan Nobles, Monica Alba, thank you both so much. We really appreciate it. Joining me now is former Arizona Republican Senator Jeff Flake. Senator Flake, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
I want to delve into all of these issues, but I want to start off by getting your take on what you just heard from my colleague Ryan Nobles on Capitol Hill. He said this could potentially be the moment that these issues that the president has presented before Congress, this fund to repay his allies who he feels have been mistreated, asking for money for the ballroom, this may be the moment where you are finally seeing Republicans push back in a significant way. What do you make of that? Do you think that's an accurate assessment? What do you make of this moment that Republicans are in?
Yeah, it seems like a bit of a perfect storm here. A couple of things. One, you're getting past the filing deadlines for primaries. So what every Republican who's up for election, a third of the Senate and all the House worries about is the president finding a primary opponent for you if he doesn't like what you're doing. That threat is going. But then what has angered so many Senate Republicans is the president supporting Bill Cassidy's opponent. That was bad enough because Bill Cassidy is a serious, good senator. Well-liked, but then also supporting Bill Paxton over John Cornyn. John Cornyn, obviously a conservative, good senator, well-liked. But in this case, it means Republicans are going to have to spend tons of money and tons of time trying to defend that seat in Texas. They won't have to do that in Louisiana, but that's going to happen in Texas. And then some of these things that Republicans simply cannot defend. This slush fund for the president's political allies, that just is not going to fly. And Republicans are rightly running away quickly from that. So, yeah, this is kind of a perfect storm. And it may be, this time you can point to it and say, this is when the great migration begins away from some of the president's policies and away from the fear that the president can target you.
Well, it is very striking to hear you lay it out in those terms, Senator. I want to follow up with you on the Senate race in Texas. We could spend the entire segment talking about it, but I do want to drill down on how you see this moment in Texas, because as you say, President Trump has now endorsed Ken Paxton. Do you think Democrats have a shot at actually winning that Senate seat if Paxton wins the runoff next week?
I think if John Cornyn were to win, I don't think that that's likely now, given the president's endorsement of Paxton. If Cornyn won, Democrats wouldn't have a chance. You wouldn't have to spend money there. With Paxton in the race, yes, Democrats have a shot. It's not a good one. This is Texas. But it's not something that you can take for granted. I mean, Bill Paxton is a very, very compromised candidate. There's a lot there. And Republicans are going to have to spend a ton of money and a lot of time defending that race. And that's time and money they could spend elsewhere. And so that's going to be really difficult. And then if Bill Paxton does make it to the Senate, you have that problem because he's a compromised candidate, has a lot of things in his past. And so it's kind of the Roy Moore situation that you saw in Alabama several years ago. So yeah, this is a big problem. And like I said, John Cornyn, 99% voting record with the president. Very well liked among his colleagues, a very serious senator, and have the president oppose him simply because he didn't defend him strongly enough after January 6th.
I want to get you to weigh in on how some of your former colleagues are viewing this moment for them. This is what Senator Thom Tillis had to say about how he's choosing to approach this moment. Take a look.
People say you're really speaking a lot more openly, and I say the same thing. I'm going to say it again here. No shit, Sherlock. I don't have to think about the words that I use anymore, right?
Okay.
If I were running for re-election, I'd probably use a few different words, try to communicate the same thing like I did in Trump 1.
Right.
But I just don't have to deal with that filter.
It's a pretty honest assessment. What do you make of what Senator Tillis said right there?
That was an honest assessment. And the bigger problem for the president, as Ryan Nobles pointed out, it's not just legislation or the agenda directly that the president wants. It's that if some of these other things pop up, like this slush fund, then certain senators will say, well, hey, I'm not going to vote for this other thing that we really need, or I'm going to use that as leverage now to get you to back off of this crazy idea to fund your political allies. So you're going to see a lot happen in the Senate and in the House that as members say, hey, we don't have to worry about primaries anymore. We're past the filing deadline or past the primary. And we better worry about, a November where there are going to be considerable headwinds already without some of these things that the president is putting forward now.
Senator Jeff Flake, it is so informative and insightful to have your perspective in this moment. Thank you. We do hope you'll come back and join us again soon.
Love to. Thank you.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.